Keeping up with what's going on in the world today, I don't know about you, but sometimes it can feel like trying to walk through a minefield. You know, just so much information flying around, trying to sort out what's actually true and what's not. Well, it's a challenge, to say the least, and that's exactly what we're going to be digging into today.
It is. It really is. It's almost like the volume and the speed at which information comes at us make it so easy for things to get twisted or just plain wrong, and then they just spread like wildfire. And I think that's what we're really trying to do here, to take a look at these situations and really understand not just what happened, but how the story about what happened gets shaped.
Exactly. We're taking a deep dive today. A deep dive into a recent development and, well, let's be honest, all the noise, all the misinformation that's come after. We're talking about former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte and his, well, surrender to the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
Yeah, this is a huge deal, both legally and politically. And I think for those who might not be super familiar with the ICC, it's a court, a global court that basically prosecutes individuals, but not just any individuals. We're talking about the most serious crimes, things like genocide, war crimes, and of course, relevant in this case, crimes against humanity. That's what we're dealing with here.
Exactly. And to help us get a clearer picture of all of this, we've got some excerpts here, some key excerpts, I should say, from a recent Inquirer opinion article. Actually, it was published just yesterday, March 21st, 2025, so very fresh. And this is going to be your guide. Think of it that way, your guide to the core events. We'll be diving into the specific disinformation that's been circulating and also looking at some really important ethical questions that this whole thing has brought up. Ready to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's break it down. Let's get into the details.
Okay, so right off the bat, the article jumps into the main event. The main event, of course, being Duterte's surrender to the ICC, to The Hague. And as I'm sure you know, this is all in connection to those serious allegations of crimes against humanity. Those accusations related to, well, the extrajudicial killings of, and this number is staggering, over 6,000 suspected drug offenders during his time as president. That's a lot to unpack right there, a truly pivotal moment.
It really is. And it's interesting because the article points out that this major development didn't exactly lead to, straightforward factual reporting. Not really. What happened instead is described as and I love this phrase, an avalanche of fake news and disinformation. Pretty powerful imagery right there.
Avalanche is right. The article then goes on to list some of these false claims that started popping up almost immediately. Claims that the arrest was unjust, that it was illegal, and even, get this, that it was a breach of Philippine laws and sovereignty.
It's really interesting, isn't it? The claim that it's unjust and illegal, it really seems to tap into, I don't know, maybe like pre-existing ideas about international bodies and national sovereignty. It's something that can easily get people fired up. And then the article also calls out this third claim, the accusation that the arrest was, quote, devoid of due process. And here's the thing, and the article points this out, this is the exact same accusation that was often used to criticize Duterte's own policies. The policies regarding those thousands of killings that happened during his administration. It's pretty ironic.
It is. It really is, almost like looking in a mirror, in a way. But here's where things take a turn that I think is particularly troubling. The article then goes on to talk about, and they use this word ignominious, the ignominious aspect of this whole disinformation campaign. And that is the alleged involvement of, well, not just anybody, but two prominent lawyers.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really sticky, right? I mean, we're talking about people who are supposed to uphold the law, understand the law. And the article names them. We're talking about Raul Lembino and Salvador Medial Dia.
And according to the article, their involvement, it wasn't passive at all. It sounds like they were very much active in spreading this information. Lembino apparently went so far as to claim that the Supreme Court had issued a TRO, a temporary restraining order. And this supposedly happened way back on March 11th, well before all of this went down. And this TRO, it was supposed to prevent Duterte from even going to The Hague, which, if true, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, a TRO from the Supreme Court is not something to be taken lightly. I mean, we're talking about serious legal action here. And the article makes it very clear that this claim, attributed to a lawyer no less, is demonstrably false. And then there's Medial Dia, Duterte's former executive secretary. According to the article, he basically flat out said that Duterte wasn't even at the ICC detention center. And the article doesn't mince words. They call it a, quote, barefaced lie.
So we've got these individuals who not only have legal backgrounds, but they've held really high-level positions, being accused of basically spreading information that's just not true. What's the motivation here? What do you think?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? It makes you think about the role of lawyers and really about the ethical obligations that come with that profession. Because regardless of, I don't know, their personal affiliations, their loyalties, their public statements, they carry weight. You know, people listen, and when they spread misinformation, it can really damage public trust. Trust in the entire legal system.
Absolutely. And the spread of this false information didn't stop there. The article talks about how Duterte's most dedicated supporters, basically they took these false narratives and amplified them. And here's where social media it comes into play. It becomes this incredibly powerful tool for spreading information, whether it's true or not.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about sharing, right? The article mentions a, quote, toxic mix of fake headlines. And even more insidious, I think, is the use of edited photos, doctored photos. It's classic disinformation tactics. They use this emotionally charged content, whether it's real or completely made up, to manipulate public opinion, to reinforce existing biases.
And the article gives a really good example. They talk about this religious procession. It was for Inang Maria in Cebu City back in January. GMA News originally reported on it. And this event, it had absolutely nothing to do with Duterte. But somehow it gets taken out of context and presented as this huge prayer rally for him, for the Punisher, as he's sometimes called.
It's a perfect example of how something that already exists, especially visual stuff, like photos, can be easily repurposed, twisted to fit a narrative that's completely false. And it works because it plays on people's existing emotions, beliefs. It makes the disinformation so much more convincing.
And then we get to this, I don't know, what some might call a weird side of social media, the world of memes. And the article talks about this strange appeal of memes, even acknowledging that they can be funny, unintentionally so. But they're making a serious point here.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The article focuses on these memes that started popping up, and these memes, they feature some really unexpected character. People supposedly endorsing or supporting Duterte. We're talking about Donald Trump. We're talking about Vice Ganda, a very popular Filipino TV host. And then this is where it gets really strange. Fictional lawyers, legal experts from TV shows and movies.
It's almost too much. I mean, they're talking about Annalise Keating, from How to Get Away with Murder. And then there's Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. And, well, I guess it had to happen. Saul Goodman from Better Call Saul. You almost have to laugh, right?
Right, it's absurd. But the article makes a really good point. The fact that these memes, these absurd memes, are being shared and people are believing them, it says something. It suggests that maybe there's a susceptibility to fake news, a lack of critical thinking, maybe even a refusal to accept, the facts. And that's not a good sign, not for healthy public discourse. The funny thing about these memes, these funny lighthearted memes, is that they can actually make people less critical. They drop their guard, and that can make it easier to accept whatever message the meme is pushing, even if it's not true.
And the article ties all of this back to the bigger picture. They say that this widespread acceptance of misinformation, it's contributing to polarization, to what they call the country's stalled political maturity. It's a pretty bleak picture.
It is, but it's a reality, isn't it? And it highlights the fact that disinformation, this isn't just harmless online chatter. This is something that actually impacts the real world. It erodes the foundation of informed debate, and that has serious consequences for democratic processes, the country.
And then the article shifts gears a little. They start talking about the impact all of this is having on judicial processes within the Philippines. They argue that this delay in holding Duterte accountable, it's actually part of a larger pattern, a pattern of efforts to basically undermine the judiciary, to weaken the rule of law.
And here's the thing, right? The article links the disinformation surrounding Duterte's surrender to other instances where there's been political interference, or pressure at least, on the judicial system. They even give specific examples, like judges being red tagged, being falsely labeled as communists simply because they dismissed cases that were seen as fabricated, often targeting activists.
And then there's this really disturbing example of judges choosing to retire early. They'd rather retire than deal with the case of former Senator Leila de Lima, the one who was very outspoken against Duterte. It paints a picture of a judiciary under immense pressure.
It does. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? It suggests that people within the justice system, they might face real risks, real consequences for doing their jobs, for making decisions that maybe don't align with certain political interests. And that's scary. That can have a chilling effect on justice itself.
And it wasn't just individuals who were targeted, was it? The Supreme Court itself, the institution, it became a target of these false narratives. We already talked about Lambino's claim about the TRO, but there was another one. And this one was even bolder, I'd say.
Oh yeah, this one's crazy. They basically created a fake statement. A statement saying that the Supreme Court had received this petition, this massive petition, supposedly with 16 million signatures. 16 million. And this petition was demanding the resignation of President Marcos. And to make it seem even more legit, they circulated it on what looked like official Supreme Court letterhead. And they even attributed it to the spokesperson's office. Bold move.
It's incredible. It's like, who would even think to do that? And the article connects these attacks on the judiciary, and they even mention the presence of Duterte's supporters, gathering at the Supreme Court, to this idea that the ICC is seen as this venue that's outside the reach of Philippine politics, that it's somehow, I don't know, more independent.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful statement. I mean, reading between the lines, it suggests that there's a real lack of trust in democratic institutions, a lack of trust that they can deliver, impartial justice in this case, especially in this case, which is, as we've discussed, so politically charged.
So with all of this swirling around, what's been the official response? The article talks about how the government has reacted, and also about the potential legal fallout for those involved in spreading these false narratives, especially the lawyers.
Right. So the article mentions that Malacanang, the presidential palace, they basically started these live discussions, these press briefings, to try and counter this wave of disinformation. It shows that even at the highest levels, they recognize that this is a problem, that they have to address it.
And it sounds like there could be legal consequences. The article says that the National Bureau of Investigation was considering filing charges, things like inciting to sedition, cyber libel, against those who were spreading the false information. And even more, some members of the House of Representatives, they were calling for sanctions against Lambino and Medial Dia, specifically those two lawyers.
It brings us back to the ethics, right? The ethical obligations of lawyers. The article makes it very clear that these two individuals, they allegedly violated, some pretty key provisions of the Code of Professional Responsibility and Accountability. And it's interesting because this code, it was just launched recently, April 2023.
It's almost like, they saw this coming, like they knew these kinds of situations would arise. The article specifically calls out Section 1 of Canon 2 on propriety, which states pretty clearly that lawyers shall not engage in unlawful, dishonest, immoral, or deceitful conduct. So if what the article is saying is true, then, well, it seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it?
It does. And then there's Section 11, which is even more direct. A lawyer shall not make false representations or statements. Again, if the article is accurate, this is a clear violation.
And then there's the canon on responsible use of social media, specifically Section 38. This one's all about preventing lawyers from, knowingly or maliciously posting, sharing, or disseminating false or unverified statements, which is, that's disinformation in a nutshell, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. And so the article asks this really important question. Shouldn't the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, the organization that represents all the lawyers in the Philippines, shouldn't they step in? Shouldn't they investigate these alleged ethical violations and maybe even discipline these members? And maybe even take it a step further, endorse complaints to the Supreme Court. I mean, we could be talking sanctions, suspensions, even disbarment.
It's a huge question. Think about it. If the people who are supposed to uphold the law, to interpret the law, if they're the ones spreading lies, what message does that send? What does it do to the integrity of the whole system? And the article ends on a pretty somber note, a warning about what can happen when truth is disregarded.
Yeah, a warning about the potential consequences. They talk about the dangers of chaos, unrest, of igniting dangerous passions, especially with the midterm elections coming up. It's like they're saying that this could be a deliberate attempt to destabilize things.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your key takeaways? What are the things that really stand out to you?
Well, I think the first thing is just how quickly this disinformation spread. And it seems so coordinated. It happened right after this major legal event. And then the second thing, and this is troubling, the alleged role of these lawyers, the fact that they were leading the charge, so to speak. And finally, I think about the bigger implications. What does this mean for the public's trust in institutions? What does it mean for, for the integrity of information and for the health of political discourse in the Philippines? These are big questions.
The article ends with this line, and it really stuck with me. How to get away with fake news is certainly one reality show we don't deserve. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. And it leaves us with some questions, hard questions. How can we as individuals and as a society fight back against this deliberate spread of misinformation, especially when it seems like the people who should be upholding the law are the ones contributing to the problem. And what's our responsibility? Our responsibility of citizens as individuals, do we have an obligation to be more critical of what we see, what we read, to hold people accountable when they spread lies? I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I think these are questions we all need to be asking ourselves.